Hello, listener. This is The Way In, a podcast about finding our way through the often impenetrable worlds of psychotherapy, psychiatry, and psychoanalysis. I'm your host, Tyson Connor. I'm a psychoanalytic psychotherapist and clinical supervisor in Washington State. Each episode of this show, I talk with other mental health professionals about the work they do and topics they care about, using language that you don't need an advanced degree to understand. Come join us as we try to find the way in. And today, our guide for today's episode is Kelsey Watkins. Kelsey is a private practice psychotherapist at Folktown Counseling in the Ballard neighborhood of Seattle, and also an equine therapist out of Smoky Point, Washington. She is also a supervisor at Lehigh Health. Kelsey, welcome to the show.
Hello.
Kelsey will be our guide into the topic of equine-assisted psychotherapy. First of all, thank you for coming onto this podcast. I'm very excited, as I often am. And listener, I'm going to give you before jumping into the interview portion, I just want to contextualize. You're very likely hearing birds in the background. We are currently recording in the same enclosure as Molly, who is your co-therapist.
Yes, and here she comes.
Oh, she heard me say her name. So you will hear birds. You might hear some sneezes. You might hear some loud thunks from Molly walking around. And if you hear a sudden change in audio quality, it's probably because Molly stepped on the recorder and we had to buy a new one. So
hopefully that does not happen.
Hopefully that does not happen. But yes, so we are here at the stables that you work out of in Smoky Point. And speaking of the thumps, there she is. Hello, Molly. With that context, Kelsey, the first question that we ask on the show is always the same, with the assumption or the understanding that all theory is autobiography. Today we're talking about more than theory, we're talking about a whole technique. But how did you come to do this kind of work?
So I have been a horse fanatic since I was a little girl. And I grew up riding and competing. I did 4-H. I competed in the A circuit and did Western pleasure and trail. Some of you may know what that means. Some of you may not. Not the point of this podcast. But I have been riding and working with horses for a very long time, but didn't ever consider a career of working with horses. I always thought they were just like a hobby or a side passion. But I went on to become a therapist, and while I was in my last year of grad school, a woman by the name of Lisa Cruz, who is an alumni, she advertised a workshop doing equine-assisted psychotherapy, and I attended it. And I really loved the approach that she had found to work from, because it was very open-ended. It's a Natural Lifemanship is a principle-based modality, so it's easily translatable and integrated into other forms of therapy.
And you were saying on the drive up here that you learned how to work with horses through a modality called natural horsemanship.
Yes. Natural horsemanship is the way that my horse trainer trains horses. And natural horsemanship uses horse behavior and herd dynamics to basically work with horses in their language.
Yeah.
Which is a great way to train and work with horses, as opposed to kind of just using like brute force or an overly like behavioral focus. So I was already kind of working in this way of kind of speaking the horse's language. What's different with natural lifemanship from natural horsemanship is it actually is like a brain-based approach that is actually challenging, kind of like helping a horse use their whole brain. Because the presence of choice is there in every interaction.
Right. So I get the sense that natural horsemanship is sort of this like training approach that relies on a lot of like awareness of how horses function naturally in the wild with one another, and trying to use those principles and that awareness to sort of interact with them very naturally, as fits the name. And peek behind the curtain, listener, after we came out here, we actually spent I don't even know how much time. There's no clocks out here. But
I didn't look, yeah.
we spent a fair amount of time essentially like going through a truncated, sort of shorter and simplified version of like how you would get started with a client, where I was on the role of the client. You were coaching me and guiding me through and giving me a bit of an experience of what it's like. And a lot of it seems to be pretty heavily informed, not just by awareness of course, behavior, but also awareness of like how individual human physiology and neurobiology and brain chemistry, how those are similar and different from horses, and how interacting between human and horse provides you as the therapist, but also me as a client, with access to a whole bunch of other information that in normal situations we wouldn't have access to, because there's not an instrument indicating to you this is what's going on. The horse responds based off of what's happening inside of the person. Is that about sort of how it works?
Absolutely. Yeah. The horse is a mirror to what's going on internally in the client, or just in the environment. So the horse is providing biofeedback in real time that is kind of like an authenticity meter.
So you went to that workshop and like,
yes,
it was like, whoa, this is crazy. Then did you just start doing it, or was like what further training clinically was there?
Yes. So as soon as I went to that workshop, I was sold right off the bat. I had attended a couple other different versions of equine therapy modalities that I didn't really connect with. And so when I found this one, Natural Lifemanship, I knew right off the bat that it just blended really well with the way that I view therapy and the way I want to work with clients. So I looked up the Natural Lifemanship organization and found that they were offering they do intensive trainings that are like a 3-day course at a ranch. And they're based out of Texas. Okay. Liberty Hill, Texas, but they do trainings all over the country. So they were coming back up to Washington, I think, for a training, and I attended that one. That was the intro training, and then I attended a couple other intensives after that.
Yeah. And then you just started doing it.
Yes.
How does it work? Like, what does it actually look like if someone is coming in for a session, an equine session? What is the actual moment-to-moment stuff that happens?
The therapy sessions can look a number of different ways. I've chosen to have a really flexible approach. Sometimes we might just sit out in this, we're in Molly's paddock, there's grass, there's dirt, there's gravel, and sometimes we might just sit in the grass and talk. Yeah. As if we're in an office, but we're actually surrounded by the North Cascade Pass. Yeah. And birds chirping and cows mooing, as you can hear. Right. Yeah. And it's just a very grounding talk therapy session. And I'm just observing Molly, maybe how Molly's responding to different content as it comes up. Other times I might be kind of coaching through a different, like building a connection with the horse and then interpreting different things that might come up for the client while they are making a request for a connection, or while they're experiencing detachment in the relationship. And we can, it's very much attachment based. Yeah, let's start with defining some of those words within. Listeners, regular listeners to this show and the last show have probably heard me talk about attachment at some point as a category in psychology. Most people are familiar with like attachment styles. There's lots of tests that you can do for that sort of thing. Like, I know that these words, attachment, detachment, and connection and disconnection, mean something particular in the way that you practice. So what do you mean by these words? Yeah, so by attachment, I mean being with the horse, so actually just having a closer proximity, and detachment meaning there's distance in the relationship. And connection is, connection can happen and should happen both through attachment and detachment. That's the goal, to be able to experience a good quality connection with the horse and in all of our relationships whether there's closeness or distance.
Yeah. So unlike the attachment styles kind of model, in this context, attachment is about physical proximity. It's about whether or not you are engaging one another's bodies, not necessarily touching, although that could be part of it. But like attachment is like, we're right there. And detachment is actually, we're far away from each other. And connection is more about the quality of the relationship. Connection is more about, are we attuned to one another? Is there a reciprocal kind of rhythmic communication, two-way communication going on? Am I hearing that well?
Yes.
So how does this work? Somebody comes in and we're working with these categories of attachment, detachment, connection, disconnection. How does that show up in a session with Molly?
Well, should we talk a little bit about what that looked like with you?
Yeah, sure.
Bring you right into it.
Yeah. So we got here, came out to Molly's paddock, said sort of hi from behind the fence. And then we came in and Molly pretty immediately came out and greeted us. But then now is feeding time. She'd just been given some more hay. And so she went back to her hay and got to eating. And then you kind of coached me through how to signal to Molly that I wanted her to come and hang out with me, basically. And then what did you see happening as I tried to signal that?
Yeah, so that is very much how a first session might go. What happened was, let's see. So we talked about a couple different foundational elements, which is you make a request for the relationship. You want to make the request from the place that the horse has the most choice.
Okay.
So standing towards her tail and then thinking about your energy as when I say the word pressure, that's basically like speaking horse.
Right.
So it's where your attention is and how much body energy you have. So I talked you through connecting with your body and knowing what your body energy is doing and then where you're focusing that. And you made your request for attachment by facing her tail. And she was responding to you. She kept sneezing and swishing her tail. She was kind of, I think you interpreted that as like, not now, I want to eat.
Yeah.
So we talked about that. We also checked in with your body to notice your breath and how grounded you felt in the moment and how congruent your brain and your body were with making the request.
Yeah. And on the drive up, you were talking about some of how it is that horses are designed or have evolved to sense physiologically, to feel other mammals in particular ways, and how that applies to human-horse relationships. Can you talk a little bit about that and how that, like, I can imagine someone listening to this and being like, it's a horse. It shook its tail. What do you mean it means something? Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yes. So one of the reasons horses are so great in therapy is because they are actually prey animals. As opposed to predators. Cats and dogs are predators, and they have so many great therapeutic benefits with their companionship and how easy it is to just have them with you all the time, unlike a horse.
Yes.
Horses are prey animals, which means they have a particular sensitivity to their environment. And they're also herd animals. So just the way their brains and bodies are wired is entirely different than with cats or dogs.
Right.
They're also large. So just being in the presence of a horse, it shifts the person into a different sort of headspace as well. So humans have a 6-foot electromagnetic field for their heart.
Right. And for a listener who's like, what the hell are these people talking about? Some kind of quantum theory, like wellness grift is this? No. If you've ever had an EKG, that stands for electrocardiogram. Those little wires that they stick on your chest are sensing not the vibration of your heart, but rather the electrical pulses going through your heart to pump it with blood. And so when Kelsey's saying that extends out 6 feet, What that means is you can sense that. Its impact is in a 6-foot radius around a person. A human being's heart sends out electrical signals to pump it that are perceptible to something that senses electrical magnetic impulses, which mammalian bodies do. We tend not to be like super conscious of it, but like we notice it. For instance, a lot of ghost hunting type activities. For a while, Ghost Hunters, the TV show, was really popular. It was sponsored by a plumbing company because the vast majority of the time, when a house feels haunted, it's because there's something with the electrical or plumbing that's impacting electromagnetic fields in odd ways. And then you get a plumber or electrician to come and fix it. It's no longer haunted. Because our bodies are designed to pick up on electromagnetic fields, just like every other mammal, but we don't have a super conscious awareness of it. So it comes across often as a creepy feeling, or something feels off when there's a weird electromagnetic signal on it. Another example is if you've ever felt like someone was watching you, that feeling is most likely attuned to something in the electromagnetic fields around you. So there's real science behind this. If you are skeptical, I record this show for my mother, and my mother is a skeptical woman. So, Mom, this is real stuff. So, sorry. Tangent. You were saying.
Oh, that was a fascinating tangent. Oh, okay. Yes. So we are electric beings.
Yes, yes.
And horses' electromagnetic field is 6 times that of ours.
Just the distance of the impact of the electricity running through their bodies.
Mm-hmm. And there's also this thing called entrainment.
I don't know what that is.
So that is the phenomena that we sync up with one another and train.
Yeah. So entrainment is a good example of this is when people sing together, when you have a choir together, if you get an EKG on all those singers, their heart rates sync up very quickly. Part of that is because they're breathing in unison because they're all trying to sing the same notes at the same time. But another part of that is that's just what people do. If you've ever had a baby who was like in a NICU, for instance, even in like containment, they need what's called kangaroo time in the NICU, skin to skin contact. And that is because an infant human needs another heartbeat to train their heartbeat how to beat in an appropriate rhythm. If we don't have that, we die. We don't function. And it's not a thing that stops once you're no longer an infant. People's heart rates and breathing and other autonomic nervous system things sync up together. I mean, the joke and phenomenon of women who live together finding that their menstrual cycles tend to start to converge is an example of that. Human bodies run on rhythm, and we tend to like our rhythms to be in sync.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yes. So this is something that's happening all the time, and we just aren't always aware of it. Happens with dancing groups too, and like dancing groups like really sync up in massive amounts of people. So our heart rates sync up, and that happens with mammals. Mm-hmm. And a horse's heartbeat is actually slower than a human's heartbeat. So just being in the presence of a horse, our hearts will slow down to match, to entrain to a horse's heart rate.
Right. So just being within that electromagnetic field, there are parts of our bodies that are picking up on it and that sense it as a heartbeat. And as mammals, we are attuned physiologically to try to sync up with other heartbeats that we feel.
Mm-hmm. And I actually think you were describing a couple times when I checked in with what you were feeling. You said, I feel calm. Like I know that I'm kind of excited. I'm in this new environment.
Yeah.
But I feel calm. And I think that was like your heart syncing up with Molly's.
Yeah, that makes total sense to me. Because like, listener, I haven't been this close to a horse in a very long time. And that was like a friend's horse that I saw on the other side of a fence. And then before that, not since I was like, 6 years old. I
didn't even ask you about your previous horse experience.
Oh, yeah, very little. Like, I grew up in the country. I knew a lot of people who had horses, but I just never interacted with them, right? Like, I did theater instead of 4-H. So there's absolutely a part of me that, like, almost intellectually is like, this is a huge animal that I am unfamiliar with that could kill me instantly if it wanted to. And my entire time in this paddock, like, Molly's chill. I'm chill with Molly. It's good. It's not like, I don't feel like I'm in a spa. I just more feel even keeled. I just kind of feel a little bit stabilized.
Mm-hmm.
And it sounds like from what you're saying, that's partially because my heart is responding to hers.
They say if you want a stable relationship, get a horse.
That's awful. Okay, so there's this sort of calming, stabilizing influence just from that entrainment, from that heartbeat. And then the horse is also very sensitive as a prey animal. How does that sensitivity help you as a therapist when working with a client?
Yes, so the horse is basically, I think I said this earlier, an authenticity meter.
Yeah.
They are always responding to and showing what is happening in the environment. And they are highly sensitive to threats. So a threat is incongruent energy, meaning, like a predator, but when they're going to stalk their prey, they lower their body energy while it's also really heightened. And that creates into the electromagnetic field an incongruence that a horse can pick up for their own survival and tell them to flee.
Yeah. So I'm getting this idea in my head. So I want to throw this out here and see if I'm hearing you correctly. Let's use this analogy of sound for electromagnetism, because like electromagnetism is also waves. It's light waves. Sound also waves. There's some similarity there. And like rhythm and music. That's sort of like an analogy that's playing through my head. That discongruent energy is kind of like discordant music. If you're watching a movie that's like a horror movie and there's a scene where you're supposed to feel high tension, they will play notes that don't sound great together because they're aiming for different feelings, or rather they're aiming for different tones. If they played on their own, they'd be fine, but together it's like, right? So if we think about a person's energy, it's kind of like, imagine you're a mountain lion and you're about to pounce on something to try to kill it. Your body is going to be full of adrenaline and cortisol. You're paying so much attention. Your heart is beating fast to try to get blood to your muscles so that you can move quickly and strike cleanly and powerfully. And at the same time, you're trying to hold incredibly still and incredibly quietly. Those two different energies are kind of like discordant notes in music. In the body, there's a tension. In the body, there's a conflict. And a prey animal is designed to be able to pick up on that tension and conflict on an electromagnetic level.
Yes. Yes. And how often do we hide behind words? How often does somebody say, "How are you today?" And you say, "Oh, I'm good." And you're not, but it's a polite thing to say, or it's just a pleasantry.
Yeah.
Or in a therapy session, anytime there's cognitive dissonance, a horse is going to kind of be the meter saying how true someone is being.
Yeah. And it sounds like how conflicted a person might be as well. Because a lot of times we are discordant or discongruent without intention.
Absolutely. Yes.
And it sounds like the horse is going to know that. And then how does Molly let you know that someone is, like, if someone is behaving in a way that, like, as a therapist, you'd have to be paying a lot of attention to pick up on it, but Molly just knows. How does she let you know, hey, this person's incongruent?
So she will actually, there's a number of different ways she can show it. She will check out. She can kind of just get like a glazed look over on her eyes and kind of hang her head, but like her nostrils will be flared. And she just looks tense, but checked out.
Interesting.
And you can know she's really checked out if, like, you go to touch her when she's in that place. She might try to, like, kind of put her ears back and, like, show you her teeth, like, hey, don't touch me. That is one way she'll show it. Another way she'll show it is she could be nervous. She could walk away. There's different layers or, like, levels of being incongruent.
Right. Yeah.
So if someone's just subtly incongruent, there's a subtler response will just be like showing she's disinterested. But when you're really congruent, horses, they want to be near because they're herd animals, they do want to be connected to other mammals.
Yeah.
And they want to be connected to the ones that are really congruent.
Right.
So a horse will move towards you when you are being congruent and you have a nice, strong electromagnetic field.
Right.
And you're breathing deeply. That shows safety.
Yeah. And we were talking when I was standing trying to put pressure, which is in this way of doing it, pressure is an ask of the horse. Mm-hmm. So when I was trying to put pressure on Molly to like come and hang out with me, and you asked me about my breathing, and you described this way of breathing, and I asked about square breathing, which is this breathing technique is often taught to like hunters and like people who go to shooting ranges and like archers and stuff, because it's a way of breathing where you breathe in and then hold your breath and then breathe out and then hold your breath. And it really gets your body calm. Like it can hold your hand very steady. And then you said something very interesting about that.
Oh, yeah. For horses, that actually is not beneficial for building connection with them, because when you hold your breath, that creates incongruent energy to a horse, as if you are holding your breath to sense if a predator's coming.
Right.
So what works well with horses as far as the breathing, it's slow, rhythmic, deep breaths.
Right.
That is what really can calm them. And I have noticed myself, I've played around with different breathing exercises on my own with Molly just for my own learning. And it is so fascinating when you really are dialed in. One of the things I love about this work too is it really does train you to notice every little thing. So every subtle tail swish, every ear twitch, every blink, every breath, like I've learned to just pay such close attention to Molly for this work, but also to clients. Like our bodies are always sending clues about what we're feeling.
Yeah.
So I've played around with different breathing techniques myself and just watched how Molly responds. And it is fascinating to see when I do like short, shallow breaths that she'll respond by kind of not being interested or moving away, or she'll kind of start doing a lot of yawning herself, which is her releasing tension in her jaw. And then when I shift to just slower, deeper breathing, how her body relaxes. It's like, because horses, I think they're so beautiful. A lot of people think they're very beautiful and that there's something magical about them. It's also, they are amazing, but it's also just very straightforward. It's not too complicated.
Yeah. Yeah, it feels like that's part of, I joked at the beginning that Molly is your co-therapist. And in some ways, like, yes, Molly's presence is inherently therapeutic. Like you said, it like that lower heart rate, resting heart rate is a therapeutic thing to be in the presence of. It is stabilizing. And it sounds like on a more like clinical level, Molly's role is less to be therapeutic and more just to give feedback, to give information that you understand and that you can also communicate to the client. That, like you say, is very straightforward, is very simple. Molly doesn't have an agenda except to be a horse.
Right. And
in her being a horse, she lets you know what it's like to be a horse around this person.
I also just want to note too, because whoever's listening can't see this, as I was talking about breath work, because when you talk about something, we start to do it.
Right.
We become aware of it. So as I was talking about breath work, my breathing changed and Molly's now standing right near me.
Yep. She's pointed right at the mic, ready to say what she needs to say. Thank you, Molly. She's so responsive. And she's like an incredible source of information. So we went to the same grad school. We both went to the Seattle School of Theology and Psychology. And one of the professors there would joke, I won't say him directly because this is a little provocative, but one of the things that he said is that back in his wild days, he was a drug dealer. And he said that he wished that we could all deal cocaine for a few years because then we would learn how to pay attention to other people. We would be able to learn how to keep our eyes out for threat and for anxiety and for trauma responses. And part of what I'm hearing you say is that in this work, you have learned how to like hone that attention to the body. There's something very in psychotherapy, listener, a lot of people practice somatic psychotherapy, which is a kind of psychotherapy that pays a lot of attention to someone's physiological state. Heart rate, breathing. That was Molly's tail, listener. That's delightful. I love her contributions today. Somatic therapies are all about the body, being aware of the body, and very much in the moment, like, where are you at physiologically? And like this, like at least how we did, my experience with Molly was very somatically oriented.
Mm-hmm. Yes, this is a somatic therapy.
It's a somatic therapy. Yep. There you go. And Molly is in many ways a instrument that gives you as a therapist a lot of information and gives the client something to interact with.
It does feel a little bit like cheating.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah.
Okay, I also want to talk about, in our experience of me having my experience with Molly, at one point, we kind of hit a bit of there was a kind of a stalemate between me and Molly, and I had my anxiety rising and I was feeling kind of stuck.
Yes.
And you suggested we just take a walk down the paddock, because it's pretty long, listener, and down at the end of it, there's a great view of the Cascades. It's beautiful. And then back up. Can you talk a little bit about what that was, at least in the understanding of the therapy you practice? What were you doing?
Yes. So I was curious about your... Sometimes if trying to establish connection through attachment might be too overwhelming to the nervous system, and you can try connecting through detachment. Mm-hmm. Or maybe you need to take some space and just regulate in a different way.
Right. Briefly, as a reminder to the listener, I can imagine someone saying connection through detachment. Keep in mind, in this language, attachment and detachment are about physical proximity, and connection is about congruence of relationship between the two. So, listener, hopefully you'll be able to think of a time when the thing that was best for your relationship with a person was to get a little bit of space for them. That would be, in the language of this theory, connection through detachment, right? If you're, just have someone sit a little farther away from you, or even go into another room for a second.
Yeah. And one of the principles of natural lifemanship is if a relationship is not good for one, it's not good for both. Or if something in the relationship isn't good for one, it's not good for both. So if one person wants the attachment, but the other one needs the detachment, you have to work out something in the in-between space.
Yeah.
Yes. So I was aware that something needed to, I wanted to try something different.
Yeah.
And what was coming up when you were making your request was also important, but
right. Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to see what some movement would shift. And so we stepped away. We walked. I asked you to check in with your body. You noticed your breathing shifted. You expressed some different feelings about kind of feeling a little bit relieved. Yeah.
My thoughts of standing there, Molly eventually was pretty focused on eating hay. And the feeling that I had about it was, well, I don't want to force her. Maybe the hay is more important than hanging out with me right now. Maybe I should just wait. Which I explained to you. I said that to you. And then you were like, okay, let's go for a walk. And as we were walking, we talked about that. And as soon as we started walking, you had me check in with myself. I was like, oh, there was some tension in me that's being released by going on this walk and going on this view and getting some space from Molly where I'm not asking her for anything. There's no pressure being applied. And then we came back up the paddock. And as soon as we got up here, she came right out to say hi to you. And then she stood right between us and she let me give her some scratches. And she seemed to enjoy them.
So you saw that it wasn't necessarily that she was more interested in the food. She chose relationship over food.
Right.
Once you or I or both of us were regulated.
Right.
Because again, she doesn't know who the client is.
Right.
Or who the therapist is.
Right. There's just two humans.
Yeah.
One of whom she probably knows a little bit better.
Yeah. So she's authenticity meter, not just for the client, but also for the therapist, which is a really interesting point too. I also feel exposed in this work too.
Yeah. And I did feel very exposed. Like you were saying earlier, it's so easy to use language to hide. Right. And I do this podcast, and when I do, I am using language to present a certain version of myself to the world. That's kind of the mode I was in when I was here. And then we were having this experience with Molly, and I was like, oh, she needs all of me.
Yes.
To really show up.
She does.
And I did feel like I was able to get there, but there was a moment where I was like, I was not there. And so she chose food. And then when we took a break and came back, I was more able to be there. Mm-hmm. And then she chose to hang out with us.
Yes.
Whoa.
Yeah. I love how you just put that. I think that's so beautiful, the words you brought to that experience just now.
Thanks.
Yeah. As we were talking about it, I was also reflecting on, I think one of the unique things I do is I do have some object relations theory in my background.
Yeah.
And some of what we've talked about in group consult, maybe you remember this when I've brought equine sessions to group consult, would be Tom referencing like, who is Molly? Like sometimes Molly could be the mother.
Yeah.
Or the baby.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Or that would maybe take some unpacking, or the breast. Then the hay is the breast.
Right. The hay breast. So, listener, for a little bit of context, Kelsey and I met in a consultation group through the Center for Object Relations. And if you're unaware, object relations is a particular branch of psychoanalytic theory that's particularly interested in mother-infant dynamics and how those lay a groundwork for lots of relational and emotional patterns that people carry into the future. And it sounds like what you're talking about is the way that Molly becomes an ideal, like, transference object. Mm-hmm. So, again, briefly, listener, you've probably heard transference defined by me before, but the short version of it is when someone has had a previous relationship, that relationship teaches them what to expect from future relationships. And you can sometimes expect things that aren't there. And that is called transference. When you expect someone to behave a particular way based off of previous experiences that is in no way based off of what the other person is doing. So Molly, let's see, maybe I can tap into some more paranoid parts of myself. If I said to you, if I exerted the pressure, the invitation to Molly, and then I was like, you know what? I don't think Molly likes me.
Yes.
Maybe Molly just doesn't like men. Like, what would you have made of that?
Oh, okay.
You don't have to psychoanalyze a pretend me if you don't want to. But
I would say, well, that's very interesting. Let's see. Maybe Molly doesn't like men. I would definitely get curious about you turning against yourself so quickly.
Ah, damn, you're good at your job. That's good. Yeah.
Yes, I would observe that quick turn against yourself and remind you that Molly does not prefer men or women. And so that is purely like you just have to know that is absolutely 100% a projection. When it's a human,
right,
you can kind of think, maybe that is true. Maybe another person does have something against men. That's really common. But for Molly, she absolutely does not.
Right. Yes. Yeah. And listener, part of the reason why I responded in that way and said, wow, that's brilliant, is because when you're talking about transference, especially in this context with Molly, the idea of transference is you take something that's actually inside of you and behave or believe as if it belongs to someone else.
Yes.
So when you said that statement of, you'd notice how quickly I turned against myself, you might have heard that and been like, wait a minute. He wasn't turning against himself. He was saying Molly was against him. Well, the whole point is there's some part of me that is turned against me that I'm saying Molly has. And you as the therapist are saying, you can't play that way, man. That's yours, not Molly's.
Yep, exactly.
That is so freaking cool. It's so powerful, right? Like you said a minute ago, that's cheating.
Yes, it is.
Like psychoanalysts take years to get to that level of like directness, but it's just right there in the right way. Oh man, I suppose I do have one more question.
Okay.
how do you prepare people for equine sessions? Like, I imagine, I could be completely wrong about this, but I imagine that you don't have a first session with someone out here in the paddock. Like, how do you get to here? Or do you sometimes?
I actually, that's a really good question. I prepare people in the phone call, letting them know the layout of the barn, where I'm going to meet them, signing a release and hold harmless agreement.
Oh, right. Yes. Your consent forms are maybe a little more extensive than mine.
And let them know of the electric fencing.
Right.
And ask typically a little bit about their comfort level with being around horses.
Sure.
But I really like to observe. So I don't give a lot.
Yeah.
Other than those things. And it's worked out well so far. But kind of like what you experienced, we kind of just showed up. I don't want to instill too much fear right off the bat.
Sure.
And when I'm with you and observing, I'm comfortable. And another thing that makes this really safe is a lot of this work is being done at liberty, which means Molly is free. She's not on a halter. We're not in a close, confined space. And when there's a lot of freedom, there's more safety because there's more choice.
Right.
And actually that can translate into a lot of relationships.
Right.
As well.
Yeah. Yeah. We're not in a space where she's confined. We're outside. It's in the open air. There's enough space in her paddock that if she wanted to get a safe distance, whatever feels like a safe distance for her, she could.
Yeah.
So it does feel very safe.
Yeah. And you're also like free to move around too. So there's nothing really, as far as risk goes, having those things in place eliminates some of the risk because horses aren't aggressive animals.
Right. They're prey animals. And most prey animals will only be aggressive if that's their last choice.
Yes.
Or they're defending something that is helpless.
Yes. Yeah.
A lot of people are like that too.
Yeah. Closed. We're closed-toe shoes because she has been known to step on toes and she is 1,000 pounds. So. Yeah,
I bet that's uncomfortable. So it sounds like a lot of people, they will contact you for equine therapy, and that's what you do with them. You meet them out here, and that's what you do. Do you ever work with clients who come to you for sort of more typical face-to-face in an office psychotherapy, and then you suggest an equine session for them or a series of them?
Yes, I actually have done that as well. So some of I call it talk therapy, just to decipher between the two. But some of my talk therapy patients I've suggested incorporate some equine sessions, maybe a series of equine sessions that we can end up kind of unpacking throughout our regular talk therapy sessions for a long period of time. Or some have just transitioned to purely equine sessions because it's such a beautiful, calming space to be, even if you have to drive an hour.
Yeah, it's very nice out here.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is a somatic modality. A lot of somatic therapies are especially recommended for people with trauma histories and trauma symptoms. Is that also true for this? Is it like...
Yes, absolutely. This is wonderful for anybody with a history of trauma because it does help build safety back into the body. It helps nurture your relationship to your body and build awareness of your body. I'm saying body a lot.
Well, there's a reason they call it somatic therapy. I think they didn't want to call it body therapy.
A good point. So yes, it's very helpful for trauma. Another reason it's good for trauma is because there's a lot of neuroscience that goes into this modality, and you can tell, I've been trained to tell where a person is at in their brain. And Molly shows me what part of a brain a person is in.
Yeah.
And with trauma, there's often a lot of fragmented parts.
Yeah.
And this really helps reintegrate the brain and the body.
Yeah. Is there anybody who you'd recommend not try equine therapy? Are there any rule outs, I suppose, or disqualifiers?
Maybe somebody who's like severely dysregulated.
Okay.
That might not go well. But
Yeah.
I think for the most part in the right, I mean, I still think that could work. It would just look a little different at first.
Yeah.
And maybe the sessions wouldn't be in the paddock with the horse. They would be outside of the paddock and just observing how the horse is responding. But I don't work with couples.
Are there people who do equine therapy with couples?
Yes, there are.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah, I think there's a lot you can do with couples and horses.
Wow. Okay.
Personally, I just work with individuals.
Sure. Yeah.
And I work with teens and adults and have worked with children as young as 9
Wow.
out here. Maybe like a really young child.
Sure. Yeah.
But I think this therapy is pretty much translatable to anybody.
Yeah. But I mean, for a really young child, I mean, unless you're doing infant mental health, which is a specialty that we'll have a podcast on someday in the future, you're usually doing parent-child stuff anyway. So if you had a kid that young, you'd probably have their parent in here too. And then it's just couples work again. Different kind of couple.
Yes.
Wow. So this modality is really, really flexible.
Yes. Yeah. Maybe somebody who like hates horses.
Right. If you hate horses, don't go to equine therapy. Right. Well, which is relevant because it's not exposure therapy, right?
Correct.
Right. You're not here to treat anyone's phobias. Mm-hmm. Well, not phobias of horses. Well, even maybe then. Who knows?
I know. It's like every answer. I'm like, well,
actually, yeah. It's a highly flexible modality.
Yeah.
Which makes sense to me because the like far too simple distillation that I've come to in this conversation is this is a modality that grants you as the therapist access to a highly attuned instrument to tell you what your client's physiological state is and their internal state is. And that doesn't allow certain defenses. That doesn't allow certain kinds of denial and certain kinds of self-deceit to run rampant. It's a modality that forces a kind of presence and that just gives you a lot more data. And I can absolutely see how that would be widely applicable.
Mm-hmm. So if you're not ready to not hide behind your words, this would not be therapy for you.
Gosh, then what am I doing here? If you're not ready to not hide behind your words, this is not the therapy for you. That is a challenging statement, and I love it. I love it. Okay. If people are curious about this and they want to learn more, where would you direct them?
I highly recommend the Natural Lifemanship organization. They have a lot of really great resources on their website. They offer a lot of different types of trainings and programs, and they have a directory to find practitioners in your area that do natural lifemanship.
Yeah, and we should be very clear, but we are talking today about equine therapy in the mode of natural lifemanship.
Yes.
There are other modalities of equine therapy where you could expect something very different, something a lot more structured, perhaps, something with like specific activities and specific stages and steps that's a little bit less flexible, maybe is fair to say.
Yes. And my way of doing equine assisted psychotherapy blends my background of psychodynamic training, object relations theory, and a natural lifemanship. And so how you're hearing me talk about this today might be a little bit different for someone. I mean, it will be different. This is my spin on it. Right.
With that in mind, yes, listener, if you go to the Natural Lifemanship website and look it up, another provider, every provider is a little bit different. Someone without the psychoanalytic background is less likely to incorporate psychoanalysis into their treatment. But that's a good place to start. If our listener is listening to this and thinks that what you're up to sounds great and they want to get some of it, where can people find you and where would you like to be found?
You can find me on the folktowncounseling.com directory. I'm also on Psychology Today under Kelsey Watkins. I don't have a website yet. I'm working on one.
And you also do supervision, but that's through a particular clinic.
I do supervision at my private practice as well.
Oh, cool.
Yes.
Do you supervise for equine therapists?
I do.
As well?
Yes.
So if you're a provider and are interested in doing this sort of thing and have access to a horse, because I imagine, although, do other people use Molly or is it just you?
No, just me.
Okay. Is that a thing where multiple therapists will share the same horse?
Yes.
Oh, interesting.
It depends on the setting. Every setting's going to be a little bit different. But something unique about my practice is that I'm not at a barn that does equine therapy. I board my horse at a barn and I get to do equine therapy here.
Right. And one of the things we were talking about earlier was like a horse doesn't need like special training to become a therapy horse.
Right.
Like unlike dogs, which is what most people are probably familiar with. And why is that?
The horse's prerequisite is just their genetic makeup.
Right.
Just the way their brain and body and wiring is done.
Yeah.
That make them good for therapy. So yeah, Molly isn't trained to be a therapy horse. Her only job is to respond to what's happening. And I don't have to tell her how to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. So listener, if you are looking for equine therapy of your own, know that you don't necessarily have to go to a barn that just does equine therapy all the time. You can get it from someone in this kind of a situation. The horses are not specially trained for it. They're genetically engineered for it over millennia by human interaction with them. Gosh. They are beautiful animals, though.
And especially Molly.
Yeah, she's lovely. Check the show notes, listeners, because all of the things we discussed will be linked there, as well as maybe some pictures of Molly.
Yes,
let's link those in the show notes.
We've got some great photos.
Got some good ones.
I do want them to be able to see just like the setting that this was done in, because you hear the beauty of the bird sounds.
Right.
But the setting is just gorgeous.
The setting matters so much. And a thing we didn't get to, we'll save this for a future episode, maybe, was the way that the physical space becomes a reflection of the metaphor of the internal space.
Another podcast.
Oh man. Anyway, this is fascinating. Thank you so much. Thank you for your time. We're about to spend more time together because we carpooled here. But
thank you so much for coming out here and allowing me to share my passion with you and even use you in practice.
Yeah, no, anytime.
For some good content.
I'm going to get to tell the story about how I recorded a podcast in a horse paddock for the rest of my life. So, my pleasure. Special thanks to Kelsey Watkins. Kelsey can be found at Folktown Counseling. Her website there is in the show notes. If you're interested in learning more about Natural Lifemanship, you can find a link to their website also in the show notes. I hope you'll join us again in 2 weeks when I interview Kevin and Catherine Clevier on the intersection of relational psychoanalytic therapy with Dungeons and Dragons and other tabletop role-playing games. This has been The Way In. This show is hosted and produced by me, Tyson Connor, with music by Ben Lewis and visual art by Dan Lane. If you enjoyed this show, please rate, review, subscribe, follow, like, share, star, heart, reblog, retweet, repost, upvote, or in some meaningful way engage with the episode on your digital platform of choice. I'm told it makes a big difference for exposing more people to the show. And if you think someone you know may like this episode, you could also just tell them about it. You can follow the show on social media, where we are at The Way In Pod. There you can give me feedback, tell me a joke, and see high-resolution versions of the individual episode art, which I highly recommend. I think Dan did a great job. Thank you for joining us. Until next time.
In my perfect world, my horse would be in my bedroom with me. But you can edit point. This is a podcast for therapists that's going to go some weird directions. That was not a Freudian slip.